We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. It's a Monday. It's March 2nd, 2026. And today we're going to be talking about some transparently terrible things happening within federal law enforcement and within the judiciary and within some personnel matters that are going on over at the FBI. So we're going to talk about Kash Patel, the director of the FBI. He's got some more drama, more splaining to do. The Department of Justice is fighting tooth and nail to avoid transparency with their symbiotic relationship with social media. Also, hackers may have stolen a whole buttload of Epstein files. A federal judge forgets the First Amendment, and we'll get an update on an FBI entrapment case. So let's get after it. Inhale, exhale. This will be one of the only podcasts that's out there today that's not talking about bombing going on in the Middle East. I'm out of my lane on it. I'm out of my depth on it. I don't want to talk about it or focus on it. I want to talk about things on this program that I kind of know something about. So let's begin with a friend of mine who put out an interesting piece to sort of just bring everybody up to speed on what's going on over at my ex-girlfriend at the FBI. And that is some turmoil that is happening amidst some firings happening. And I like to go to Carrie Pickett from the Washington Times. Headline reads, more turmoil at FBI amid firings by Patel, whistleblower action, and Olympics visit. She kind of did this giant smorgasbord covering of what the drama happened over the last week there. But I do think it's an interesting way to launch us off today as we're talking about some transparently terrible things occurring. So from the piece from my friend Carrie Pickett at the Washington Times, says at least 10 FBI employees, agents, analysts, and supervisors who worked on former special counsel Jack Smith's investigation into President Trump's retention of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago were fired last week. Subsequent terminations occurred Thursday, bringing the estimate to a dozen in the course of 2 days. Now, this was covered by other news outlets out there, but I think that Carrie did an excellent job of bringing up a couple of questions that should be pondered. Now, the timing of it is pretty fortuitous, pretty serendipitous for the FBI director, who's been taking some heat in light of his recent escapades when he traveled over on the taxpayer dime to go to Italy to allegedly meet with his counterparts in Italy about cybersecurity matters. I guess he couldn't achieve that over a Zoom call, and it just happened to coincide with the final couple of days with the Olympics that he went out and publicly said he was planning to attend last July. And despite any sorts of spin getting from his public affairs office that the news getting access to his schedule after he had already gone to those events and was no longer there was some sort of security concern, possibly prosecutable, is a joke. It's pretty clear. The firings attaching to Jack Smith's investigation of Donald Trump's classified documents case, Arctic Frost. This firing is a break glass in case of emergency type of move by a man who is desperate to deflect from his SEC frat boy wannabe experience at the Olympics. Let's put that on the shelf, though. The questions that emerged, though, from this piece from Carrie Pickett, I think, are reasonable. The timing of it, we've covered. But the timing of it is problematic because this investigation and these personnel were involved in the Arctic Frost investigation multiple years ago. Now, did the FBI director suddenly learn about them right now? Well, That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He's had access to the Arctic frost files for over a year now. He has been at the helm there for nigh on 12 months. Did he just get around to finding out who the troublemakers are? Or are there more than a few troublemakers who he's able to identify? He's been purging over the last 12 months. Why would that necessitate a 12-month process? Why couldn't you just fire them all at the same time? Are you holding back a few patsies here or there in case you come up with a break glass in case of emergency sort of scenario and then you can deflect? Is that what happened here? And as long as we're talking about the personnel, what sort of personnel are they? Are they special agents, the investigators? Are they support staff? Were they participants in the case, but not the case managers? That could be in the form of some financial analyst who's just looking at spreadsheets. Could it be an evidence technician who just took the evidence and logged it into the vault? Could it be some sort of support staffer who went out and actually took audio and burned it to a disk? Is that a person who should be held accountable and losing their job? What was their involvement in it? What was their role in it? And what would have been the right course of action from these people? Now, I'm not defending Arctic frost, but I want to ask the question, how should that person have comported themselves? Well, you had a couple of options. Should they have become a whistleblower and gone to the office of the inspector general and maybe Congress with their concerns? Because case in point here, that doesn't end really well for you. Should they have just followed orders if they, in fact, knew how diabolical and evil the entire plot was? And maybe if they didn't know and they just followed orders like they burned audio to a disk, should they be fired for that? What sort of action would have been the right thing to do? Should they have waited for Kash Patel to become the director of the FBI and then gone and self reported themselves and thrown themselves at his mercy? It's like they were in a trap all along. What could they have actually done? All right, now let's go to another one about the director of the FBI. And this is an old one that's now reemerging and catching on with some more mainstream media out there because it is now in the New York Times at one point a newspaper. And why is it in the New York Times at one point a newspaper? And that's the story about the girlfriend. Headline: Kash Patel's girlfriend seeks fame and fortune escorted by an FBI SWAT team. So from the piece, Alexis Wilkins is escorted in her travels by special weapons and tactics team members drawn from FBI field offices around the country. Soon after becoming FBI director last February, Patel beefed up staffing in Nashville, where Wilkins lives, then assigned a SWAT team composed of 4 agents and 2 vehicles to protect her full time. Last May, Patel attended a secret national security conference at an exclusive resort outside of London and invited Wilkins to join him at a group dinner with King Charles III at Windsor Castle. All right, a little bit of inside knowledge. FBI SWAT team, Special Weapons and Tactics. There are SWAT teams in all 56 field offices around the country. It's not a full-time gig. I did it. It's what's called a collateral duty. Now, typically, you're doing high-risk warrants and arrests. Not a whole lot of extra for that. Every once in a while, you get tasked with providing support for protective details for the Attorney General and for the Director of the FBI. Those are full-time assignments. The individuals doing that may have been SWAT in a prior life. They may have been hostage rescue team in a prior life. They might have been special operators with the military in a prior life. But if you're on the protective detail for the Attorney General or for the Director of the FBI, think of it as a bodyguard. Think of it as like Secret Service for the president. They're wearing the suit. They got the earpiece in. They're planning out where that individual has to travel. But that's it. Those are the 2 specific people. And I guess now we've expanded it out, or at least did for a time being, when Dan Bongino was the co-deputy director of the FBI. They stood up a protective detail for him as well. The other people in their lives, their wives, their children, they don't get a protective detail. I had a chance to augment protective details for both the Attorney General and for the Director of the FBI, and kind of had conversations with them offline about what their typical flow of action is, what they're normally doing. And a lot of that's contingent on the individual. From what I understood, Loretta Lynch, she was kind of a jerk. She would go out late at night and want to have dinner past closing time at restaurants. So they would have to follow her around. Her husband liked to be treated like royalty and wanted the protective detail to carry his luggage for him. And he insisted that he needed protection, even though that wasn't their responsibility. We talked about William Sessions, former director of the FBI in the 90s, the first director who was fired, and how he abused it and had protective detail looking after his wife when she was going on nail appointments. And then you hear other stories. I heard that Eric Holder and Jeff Sessions, so former attorneys general, they were kind of homebodies. They didn't require very much. They just went to and fro the office, and the protective detail kind of would just camp out there and wait around to see if they were needed, but normally weren't needed. But none of that relates to significant others, to family members, like the Secret Service protects the First Lady and the president's children. No, no. That sort of protection is not bequeathed to significant others of the Attorney General or to the FBI director. They specifically get it. That's it. And when they travel around and they need extra help from the local SWAT teams to help do it, which I did, that protection detail goes to the individual attorney general or to the FBI director, not to their wife, and certainly not to their girlfriend or a girl who's their friend in the case of Alexis Wilkins. Now, it got worse than that, because we'll go back to the New York Times and they can tell you a little bit more. So, Ben Williamson, who is the propagandist on behalf of the FBI, an assistant director of public affairs, here's a quotation from him. Quote, as a direct result of her relationship with Director Patel, she being Alexis Wilkins, the girl who's his friend, is facing more than a dozen active death threats, unquote. Okay. Doesn't matter. As long as we're going to hang our hat on, well, the policy requires us to do XYZ, like fly in a private jet. I mean, if Kash Patel wanted to fly in a commercial jet, who's going to arrest him? And who, pray tell, is responsible for augmenting policy? I mean, Kash Patel could, or he could ask Pam Bondi, when she's not talking about the Dow being just so high, to change it so that he would be required to fly commercial. But as long as we're talking about policy, the policy says that the protective detail is not supposed to protect your significant others, the girls who are your friends. Paul Pelosi was nearly assassinated. Remember that story? That was a couple of years ago. He's the husband of Nancy Pelosi. She was the Speaker of the House, third in line to become president in the case of the president and vice president going down. And that wacko invaded his house and beat him over the head. He had to go be hospitalized. He didn't get extra protection. Now, the FBI is not responsible for that. That comes from the Capitol Police. But all the Capitol Police did in that case was put extra surveillance cameras up at their residence. They didn't give extra bodies over there. They didn't give him a full-time protection detail. But because he's special and his name is Kash, apparently he sees fit to divert resources away from FBI SWAT teams to be full-time protection detail for his girlfriend. And as I said before, if you're a SWAT guy for a field office, in this case in Nashville has its field office now. That used to be Memphis and Knoxville, and they consolidated them and they made it Nashville. That's a collateral duty. That's not your full-time gig. You're supposed to be a case agent outside of that. You could be working counterterrorism or criminal matters. And then 4 times a month, you go do training. And then if there's a call out to do a high-risk warrant service, then you are brought up. But if your work product is sacrificed as a result of that, if it becomes less than par, then you're expected to leave the SWAT team and focus on what your actual job is that you actually get paid to do. And that's investigate criminal matters or national security matters. This means that there are now people who are being pulled away from their full-time duties, with the exception of their training that they're having to do and all the other sort of accoutrements attached to being as FBI special agent. If you're a SWAT guy, this is more time away from doing the thing that the American people want you to do and pay you to do, and that is investigate national security matters and criminal matters. Now you have to sit and camp out outside Alexis Wilkins' home during what hours? Full time, 24 hours a day. Now, I'm sure that they're rotating those responsibilities around, but 4 agents at any given time? How big is the Nashville SWAT team? If it's a full size SWAT team, could be 12, 13, 14 guys. I don't know. Maybe they have 2 teams. Maybe they have 25 guys available. How much are they burning the candle now? Because the FBI director feels special and he's going to allow these resources to be diverted to protect the girl who's his friend. He's a transparently terrible person. He's certainly not a good leader. He certainly doesn't know the very policies that exist, and it'll go against him when and if the Democrats come back into power after the midterms. And then there's going to be some nice congressional hearings and some impeachment inquiries, I'm sure. Or we can stay in the DOJ now and also concentrate on the FBI for our next piece. And this comes from the Daily Caller. Headline: Bondi's DOJ still refusing to disclose government payments to Twitter during peak censorship. This relates to the censorship that occurred during the 2020 election, during the coronavirus madness. Those are the bad old days, right? The very tail end of the Trump administration into the Biden administration. And then we learned from the Twitter files when guys like Matt Taibbi went in there, and I think Michael Schellenberger went in and got access from Elon Musk to Twitter, which is now X, and found out just how much collusion was going on between the federal government, particularly agencies like the FBI, and Twitter. And they were suppressing speech that went on there. People were going on and talking about, hey, this virus, it seems like it might have originated in the biolab in Wuhan, and said, no, 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 it was definitely the bat that flew 600 miles from its nesting place without stopping and then went to a wet market and apparently vomited into a stew. That's far more logical. Or maybe some other concerns about an experimental gene juice that we were being required to inject into ourselves so that once we got the mark of the beast, we could go to work at our non-essential jobs that we were told to stay home and stay safe from the year prior. Or maybe you had questions about Hunter Biden, not Kash Patel. I mean, they're basically the same thing at this point, right? Just living high on the hog because of daddy, I mean, the president. But Hunter Biden, the bag man for the Biden family, traveling around, jet setting around and collecting all that cash for the Biden family. And then there was that pesky story about the laptop from hell. A friend of mine, Miranda Devine, wrote a whole book about, because in his drunken / crack-induced stupor, he took his laptop to a repair shop, and that guy found out what was on there because he never went back. And it was pretty clear that he was the bag man for the Biden family. So the story broke. And then the FBI mobilized, and they talked to Facebook and Twitter and all these other social media sites and said, that's probably from Russia, so you should suppress the story. Now, there was money attached to that as well. It was a way to sort of hide the levels of involvement that they had. And the Daily Caller is drilling into that. And it's really disappointing, we'll say, at the very least, troublesome. How about just flat out awful that now that our party is in charge, now that our people have control of the Department of Justice and the FBI, that they're continuing to fight tooth and nail the judicial watches of the world who just want to find out what the heck happened a few years ago between collusion of federal governments and big tech companies. That's being fought by Pam Bondi's DOJ and Kash Patel's FBI. So, from the piece and Daily Caller, Judge James Boasberg, oh, that dastardly Boasberg, agreed that the DOJ can withhold the FBI's quarterly payments to Twitter for legal process requests from 2016 to 2023. Now, what is a legal process request? What it actually should be, and that's not what it was for these cases, but legal process, you send a subpoena. We need documents. That requires a full-time person, a full-time team over at Twitter to go and pull those documents and send them out. They bill the federal government for their time. The federal government has to pay them for that. They don't just do that out of the goodness of their heart. So the federal government is supposed to fork over the monetary costs that it will require. Think of it like a FOIA. If you send a FOIA off to the federal government and they actually comply with it, like let's just pretend for a minute that they do actually comply with it, you have to pay them the person's time the paper costs. You're on the hook for it. It's not free to you. So that's what a legal process cost is. But what wound up happening, what we all know happened, was that in the form of legal process costs, the federal government was just shelling out money to these big tech companies like Twitter at the time. So they did their bidding. It was kind of a payoff, which is why Judicial Watch wanted to know that information. Just how much were you sending over there? And did it comport with your requests, or was it a little bit more? And what's the resistance to this? We're supposed to be the most transparent administration in history since Charlemagne roamed the earth. How is the Department of Justice justifying this now that Pam Bondi, the blonde and bodacious woman in charge of the DOJ, is at the helm? How are they pushing back? Well, she's arguing, or her ilk are arguing, that, quote, releasing the amounts of money that the FBI paid to Twitter will provide insights into FBI's investigative activities. Oh, sources and methods. We can't tell you that. Of course you can. These were things that happened before. They also said that bad actors would use this knowledge to evade FBI detection. I'm going to need you to spell that out for me. If you're an evildoer, if you're plotting to do something on and through Twitter, and you find out how much money the FBI pays Twitter for legal processes, will that dissuade you? Really? Really? You think the pedophile who's trying to groom a kid to send him child sexual abuse material would be like, I was going to do it, but it looks like the FBI paid Twitter a lot of money in 2019, so I'm going to back off. No, no, that's absurd and ridiculous. But they're trying to make any case they could. And all Boasberg, that communist judge, requires is any case at all, so we can keep it under wraps just how much censorship went on during the Biden administration. Now, why is Bondi doing this? Why is Patel arguing on this? Because it's the ring of power. They want to continue doing it. They don't want the American people to find out just how bad it was in the old bad days, because the new bad days are upon us and the future bad days will be over the horizon. We just can't give up that ring of power. Now, they want to keep that stuff sort of uber, mega, MAGA Doppler secret. Here's something else, though, and I don't know if it's 100% true, but I think for the awareness of the American Radicals podcast audience, it's worth going into, because we cannot let Epstein go away. This is the millstone that has hung around the Epstein administration, I mean Trump administration's neck, forever. They have refused to comply. I mean, as much as they want to do the malicious compliance with the Epstein Transparency Act, that was a trove of documents, a palette of documents that they dumped on us. So included in that, and it's not the whole slew of documents it's being reported, was a revelation that an interview was conducted by the FBI of one of its own, and it's an individual who came forward and said that the Epstein files were hacked a couple of years ago. So I saw this from Headline News, and there was a link to the actual document from the Epstein list that I will put in the show notes. And it's the headline: hacker gained access to Epstein files during Super Bowl Sunday in 2023, 100 terabytes of data lost. Before we get to the details, we talked about how the sheer number of documents that we got does not comport with the amount of terabytes of data that were believed to have been in the Epstein files. It was reported that it could have been somewhere 40 to maybe upwards of 50 terabytes. If 100 terabytes was hacked, that means that it's double what was previously told. And we haven't even gotten 1 terabyte revealed to us. So, but from this piece specifically, this came from a computer lab. It's actually a child pornography, child sexual abuse material, child exploitation operations unit in Washington. Apparently, there was an infiltration into the computer lab because they were allowing people to do work from home. Because what happens is, with a lot of these guys who work undercover online, they can't just get back to the office. They have to constantly be going in to these forums where all these pedophiles hang out and updating themselves, so that, if they're seeing that, oh, this guy's only posting on here at 9 to 5 on weekdays. That might be a law enforcement. That might be a Fed. We're not going to keep him in the inner circle. The online undercovers know that, so they're continually jumping on their various devices and doing things from home so that they can interface with these pedophiles and evade their suspicion of being law enforcement. But because of that capability, this individual came forward and said, yeah, we had a hack. And the agent, his name is Aaron Spivak. He said that 500 terabytes of data went missing. Later on, it gets into the specifics that he was able to recover 400 of the 500 terabytes. But in order to do that, he was told to just Google how to do it because we don't know it, because the motto of FBI technology is yesterday's technology tomorrow. So, I don't know about the veracity of this claim. Headline News brought it to the attention. They did link to the DOJ document, but like I said, through malicious compliance, there's a lot of crazy people in there. I read through the document. It's 65 pages, 64 pages. It looks like there's some editing that went on there. I don't know about the authenticity. Reading about the verbiage, the insider conversations that would go on, use of acronyms and knowledge about chain of command and the protocols that went on. It's got some legitimacy, but then again, there's edits that are in there. So I'm not sure entirely if it is true, but I think that would be something through transparency we should drill down on a lot more of. I mean, for a DOJ that wants to hide just how many dollars they sent to Twitter, they do not want to let the American people know that a potential hacker during the Super Bowl went in and stole 5x what was previously reported as being the complete level of the Epstein files. That might be transparently awful for the Department of Justice. Okay, now let's talk about some judiciary stuff, some judges doing things and problems over at the DOJ with bringing prosecutions. So, from the New York Times, at one point, a newspaper headline reads, Judge dismisses Minnesota gun case as prosecutors struggle with resignations. Now, this is a hit piece against the DOJ because they're saying that Minnesota has lost so many prosecutors due to the illegal alien cases and they can't keep up with it. They're being distracted. And now this evildoer who had access to a gun is going to be put back on the street. But I can't disagree with the takeaway that they are not doing their jobs, even though I disagree with the premise of the only reason is because the DOJ is just distracted with illegal aliens. I think they need to focus more on illegal aliens. I think we need mass deportations. It's kind of spelled out for us in our social compact. One of the few charges that we expect as the American people when we gave up some of our liberties from our federal government was to protect and defend the border and eject people who should not be here. So I would like to see that ramped up more. But you have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And if you have personnel problems, as they highlight from the New York Times, that's resulting in you losing out on cases, then there needs to be some necessary adjustments. So what were the details here? Now, this judge, his name is Magnuson, Judge Magnuson. He dismissed the case with prejudice, means that they can't actually charge this person again. Magnuson concluded that the defendant's constitutional right to be tried in a timely manner, you're entitled to that in our pesky document, had been violated. Prosecutors said in court filings that the indictment arose from a 2-month surveillance of our bad guy's drug trafficking activity. He was a 5-time convicted felon, 5 times convicted of illegal weapons. And he's out on the street slinging dope. So they did a 2-month investigation of him, found out that he had drugs and guns. So you can't do that. It's a 924 federal firearms violation. So they brought an indictment of him again. And now this judge, because he's a communist, tossed it out. Or did he? Or did he just follow the process? I don't know his background, his intentions. From what I understand, he's vocalized disappointment with the Department of Justice bringing charges against illegal aliens. So we kind of know where he is at on it. But he's not wrong on the process. You're entitled to a speedy trial. It's in the pesky, dusty document. And the DOJ crapped the bed. They didn't bring it in a timely fashion. They asked for extensions. I'm sorry, Your Honor, we can't bring it. Sucks to be you. It's not supposed to be easy to be in law enforcement or to be in prosecutions. You failed, and now this dirtbag gets to go free to probably go and hurt somebody. That is an onus that's on the government. That's a fail from them. And now we're getting some transparency of just how incompetent and incapable these losers, these turbo losers are at the DOJ. They're going to fight tooth and nail. They're not going to miss a filing date to stop you from finding out just how much money they sent to Twitter to censor your speech. But they can't get to court on time to stop a 5-time convicted felon, a guy who's had illegal weapons 5 times before and is out there yet again slinging dope with guns attached. They can't keep him in handcuffs. Misplaced priorities, transparently terrible. Now, I don't agree with the politics of the prior judge, but I do believe in process. And I certainly don't agree with the politics of Boasberg, who continues to help the government run cover. I'm transparently disappointed in this next judge, even though he ruled in the proper way. What am I talking about? Call back. Remember that whole thing where the FBI went and did a search warrant at a Washington Post journalist's house and seized her devices, her phone, her laptops? Because the Pentagon Papers, I guess, don't matter. The First Amendment really isn't a thing in the eyes of the Department of Justice and the FBI. Pretty transparent, right? Well, we got an update. A judge ruled in the journalist's favor. So this piece actually comes from CNN, even though it's about the Washington Post. Headline: Judge bars Justice Department from searching through devices seized from Washington Post reporter as part of leak probe. Now, the journalist's name, her name was Hannah Nathanson. She's sort of like the deep state whisperer. I mean, for the left. Everybody who hates Donald Trump because he's mean, orange, and literally Hitler goes to her. She's got hundreds, if not thousands, of insiders who are giving her stuff, which is probably one of the reasons the Department of Justice and the FBI wanted to seize her devices, so they could just cull through it to see who she's been talking to, and they could evict those people from the government. But there is a First Amendment, and it's not supposed to be easy, remember? So Judge William Porter has concerns that investigators would use the search warrant that he approved to peer into parts of Hannah Nathanson's data that were unrelated to the leak investigation. And that would constitute what is called an unlawful general warrant. And we're not supposed to have general warrants. So this judge, Judge Porter, he rejected separate requests from lawyers for the government to have the DOJ look through it kind of as a tank team to say, hey, what are we entitled to and what are we not entitled to? But once they did that, they would know everything, right? And who's to say they wouldn't just push that on over to the investigators to just dig deeper into? So what this judge says is, hey, I wrote this warrant. It's not supposed to be a general warrant. So I am going to review the contents to see what is pertinent to your investigation of this leak. And these devices need to go back to the journalist. You're inhibiting her exercise of the First Amendment. The First Amendment is not just speech. It's press. She works in the press. If she doesn't have access to her sources, you're hurting her professionally. And her profession is all about the First Amendment. So now you're doing irreparable harm to her for her free exercise of that and professional harm to her. Those devices need to go back to her. Now, what is my concern with this judge? Now, this is the proper ruling. I would actually contend that the initial granting of the search warrant was improper, but I didn't go to law school. Maybe they taught something different outside of the Pentagon Papers at law school. Can't really give you a first-person account to it. But what I can give you a first-person account to is that his justification, Judge Porter, he's very disappointed in the Department of Justice from their search warrant failing to educate him on a law. Maybe he was absent the day they taught this law at law school. So back to CNN. Let me actually read from the article. Judge Porter scolded the Department of Justice for failing to inform him of the applicability of the Privacy Protection Act of 1980 because it established guardrails to prevent federal investigators from searching and seizing work product materials from a newsroom or journalist unless a reporter is themselves the subject of a criminal investigation or prosecution. Um, that's the First Amendment. Why did you need to be educated on the, what is it? The Privacy Protection Act of 1980? The First Amendment says that the government can't look at your papers and they can't inhibit your ability to exercise your First Amendment. And that is exactly what is going on here. So, do you First Amendment, bro? How are you a federal judge? Well, he's probably a reliable communist, and that's what they do. They reward their friends and punish their enemies. And he likely views the Department of Justice as his enemy now because the president's mean, orange, and literally Hitler. But the Department of Justice is wholly in the wrong here, entirely. They are not entitled to that journalist's papers or her devices when she is reporting on things and she's not the subject of an investigation or a prosecution. This was just given to her. You're perfectly entitled to pursue the leaker. If he's handing out classified material, that's a violation of the law. But as long as the journalist isn't encouraging this guy to go and break the law, the Pentagon Papers has a precedent. She's allowed to report it. And this judge, I have no explanation for it. How could you possibly say it's the job of the DOJ to educate me on a law when we have an overriding law? It's in a pesky, dusty document. It's number one. Do you First Amendment, bro? Transparently terrible at your job as a member of the bar, as a member of the judiciary. All right, let's go over now to I guess it's a local law enforcement matter, but it kind of ties into a transparency issue that we saw from the federal level. And this is a Substack piece, and it comes from the Triangle Trumpet. This week in the triangle.com. Headline: They are destroying the planet. Was Hedingham mass shooting motivated by environmentalism? Now, this was a story that is a blast from the past, a few years ago, actually, from 2022. It's about a mass shooting. This kid, he was 15 years old. His name was Austin Thompson. And he did this killing spree. He winds up killing 5 people, killed his own brother. Then he went and shot a couple of neighbors. Then when officers came up, he ambushed them and wound up shooting one of the officers in the knee. And I believe that officer had to end his career. He wasn't able to return to duty. And then he was holed up in the wilderness and he winds up trying to kill himself. He does shoot himself in the head, but he doesn't die. So then the cops move in and wind up grabbing this guy. And then because he's underage, it comes in like, what are we going to do? How are we going to charge him? Well, this kid, Austin Thompson, pleads guilty. So the facts of the case are kind of kept under wraps, and they wind up just going directly to a sentencing. And they say, hey, in North Carolina, we can either put him in prison for life with no parole or put him in prison for life with a chance of parole. And they went with the more severe, and they said, no chance of parole, no objections to that. But there's always the question, right? Like, what would drive a 15-year-old to do that? And there was a fair amount of hiding it. Now, apart from this case, and we'll get back to it in a minute, who remembers the Covenant Christian case? That was in Nashville, home of the FBI director's girl who's his friend, where the tranny, the LGBTQAI plus hashtag underscore asterisk rainbow kamikaze, Audrey Hale, she went in after injecting herself with a whole bunch of male hormones and winds up killing 6 people, 3 small children, 3 teachers. And they covered up the Tranifesto. They said it was a blueprint for Armageddon. We can't possibly reveal it, and wound up being just a screed against Christians and in favor of the LGBTQ rainbow kamikaze mafia. We got access to that finally. And Kash Patel handed it over to Megyn Kelly. And I'm sure there was some sort of agreement that she had to do some beneficial coverage, maybe beneficial coverage of the girl who's his friend, which she did in due course. But here, this locality, they covered it up. So again, from the Substack, and it is this week in the triangle.com headline, they are destroying the planet. Was Hedingham mass shooting motivated by environmentalism? So the day after the attack, the police chief her name is Estella Patterson, told the media that there was no motive known, and it was repeated in the preliminary report put out by the department. However, one of the detectives came forward and testified, quote, this is from the manifesto. The reason I did this is because I hate humans. They are destroying the planet/Earth. And then that requires and necessitates a review of what the heck they're teaching kids in that area. It's the Raleigh area, Wake County. And they are wholly bought into the DEI madness, the LGBTQ madness, and the environmental madness. So as long as we're looking at potential threats out there, and eco-terrorism has been on the radar of law enforcement for a really long time, and yet it was covered up. Why? Well, because it was ideology that's held by significant swaths of the left in the country, and we can't possibly characterize that as a motivating factor behind the murder of 5 people and the injury of others. Transparently terrible. They cover it up whenever it's just politically inconvenient. That is not the job of government at a state, local, or federal level. Your job is the process. You gather the facts and you present them. You do so publicly because a mass shooting, a 15-year-old becoming radicalizing and murdering 5 people, that's a public interest matter. That's something that we should be aware of, and we should find a cautionary tale. Was there something that maybe drove this person to madness, that motivated them to carry out this awful crime? Well, then we should probably find that out because we want to prevent that from happening in the future. There's that whole thing about if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. That's why we do that. But if it's politically inconvenient, then we're not going to be transparent. Similarly, if it's inconvenient for our agency, like we may have colluded with big tech because there were political narratives out there that we want to suppress, we're going to resist that. Transparency is the enemy of good governance. Okay, I've got one more that I want to get to, and it's an update on an FBI entrapment. We're getting a little bit of transparency on it, but who knows how much. Headline USA.com. FBI informant in Trump assassination case previously worked for U.S. Army in Afghanistan. This is Asif Merchant. And the informant in this case, he testified under a fake name to protect his identity. He reportedly said that he knew Asif Merchant since 2017. Before that, he served as a linguist for the U.S. Army. The informant was reportedly paid $20,000 for his work, which included meeting with Asif Merchant in a hotel wired for surveillance in 2024. It was then and there that Merchant allegedly pitched his plot. A week later, this informant also arranged for Asif Merchant to meet with the hitman. Now, let me give you a little bit of a refresher on Asif Merchant. Asif Merchant was arrested the day before the Thomas Matthew Crooks assassination, a successful assassination attempt of Donald Trump in July of 2024. His background: he flew from Pakistan to the United States. He did so because the FBI Dallas field office endorsed him arriving because they had gotten a counterterrorism investigation of him all spun up and they were ready to throw a flashbang at his feet as soon as he got off the plane. No. They actually allowed him to travel then to New York City, into the interior of the country for multiple months operating, where he met with who he believed were his fellow ideological travelers, but apparently were informants who had known him for 7 years, so had groomed him for nigh on over half a decade. And his plot was essentially to recruit dozens of fake protesters to go outside of politicians' houses to distract them, while another individual, I believe it was a female, he said he wanted, infiltrated their homes somehow, like Tom Cruise from Mission Impossible, and just descended from the ceiling and grabbed classified material because apparently Asif Merchant believed that all the politicians in New York City were Joe Biden. And after getting that classified material, they would also start a rotating assassination plot of multiple politicians within the United States, not named, but it was implied that Donald Trump might have been one of them. He was going to go, Asif Merchant, recruit hitmen at various nightclubs in New York City, and they would then go forward and start killing American politicians. And Asif Merchant was going to get this all done for $5,000 that he didn't have because he's retarded, because he's a low intelligence individual that the FBI loved to entrap. And apparently, according to Headline USA, use informants, pay informants with your money, $20,000 to groom a retarded guy and then sponsor him coming into the interior of the country so that they could get a really nice counterterrorism headline. The more transparency we get in these cases, the better. It is the playbook every single time. Project Salam did a study on this. It's a little bit dated, 2014. Excess of 90% of FBI counterterrorism indictments and arrests involve an individual who is neither predisposed nor capable of actually going ahead with the attack, but for the involvement of the FBI. They just find their patsies, set them up like bowling pins, and knock them on down. This is a transparency issue that is massive, and it needs to be exposed. As much as we want to see the exposure of the collusion between the FBI and the Department of Justice and big tech when it came to election stuff or coronavirus stuff, the entrapment of people for the good of the government is something that is enough, should be enough to necessitate the demolition of these institutions. If I, Men in Black, gave you the flash and erased everything that I talk about all the time on this program, up into and including what I talked about today, and I was able to tell you that 90% of the terrorism arrests involve a vulnerable person who would never go do a terrorism. If you're an objective observer of reality, if you're a critical thinker, if you have just a semblance of common sense, you would say, oh, that's a secret police force. That's the KGB. That's the Cheka. They have to be shattered to 1,000 pieces and scattered to the wind. And every moment that goes by, but we are not doing that, is at our own peril. All right. So we've reached the end for the day on the American Radicals podcast, guys, but I'm not going to leave you without a nice palate cleanse. But before we do that, just a reminder, if you happen to be checking us out on YouTube at AmRadPod or rumble.com at AmRadPod, make sure that you do all those things. Thumbs up, follow, subscribe, leave us a comment. And then just as a personal appeal, guys, I'm really trying to build up our Spotify. So you can check us out live on YouTube and on Rumble. Spotify is always after the fact. We come noontime live. Normally around 1 o'clock is when I'm able to upload the audio and the video onto Spotify. Spotify is going to be the way for us to best monetize this program. We're not monetized yet, but just as a personal appeal, if you happen to be checking us out on YouTube or Rumble or any of those other platforms, just one time this week, go over to Spotify. It's free. Just subscribe there and play the podcast. Just play it in the background. You could turn the volume down. It would go a really long way to helping the American Radicals podcast become a monetized podcast. And maybe we could take this thing to the next level. Maybe we could make this a professional endeavor, which I can connect because I'm a professional to our palate cleanse today. This is a touching story of a father and a son, and that son taking the next step into his profession, and that is becoming a professional football player for his father's team.
Hey, buddy. Hey, it's going good. This is Dad. My phone wasn't working. Look here, man. You want to come to work with me next week? I wouldn't mind that.
Dad worked for the Dallas Cowboys and got to tell his son that the team was drafting him. Pretty cool. All right, guys, that's going to do it for the day. But we plan to be back with you tomorrow at noontime. And until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals Podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.